Parker Arts Center in Minneapolis for a dialogue this evening with artist Julian Schnabel. Tonight's program is titled Julian Schnabel, Artist-Director, and we'll talk about his exceptional career as a painter, sculptor, and as a film director. His films include Basquiat, Before Night Falls, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, Berlin, and his newest film, Miral. I'm Darcy Alexander. Please join us this evening for a conversation with Julian Schnabel. Welcome again.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
It's great to have you here. And
Where are we?
We're back in the theater. I know it's a little
right.
dark
Later
out
we'll
there.
turn the light on. I'll be able to see you too.
Good. Unlike last night, we're talking a little bit tonight about the relationship of your artwork and your filmmaking. And the two have informed each other throughout your career, really. And I think what we'd like to do is to just jump right in and start with a clip of a section of The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and really use that as a springboard to talk about some of the works that we have in our galleries and sort of how you conceptualize this relationship between these two different facets of your practice, which really are one. So unless you have something else that you'd like to
Did anybody
say.
get a chance to see the paintings that are here or not yet?
I think everybody has seen the paintings.
Have you seen the paintings out here? Are they?
Yeah, they were installed probably about 2 weeks ago and will be up for about another 3 weeks. So
So you can
there's
see
plenty
them.
of opportunity.
It's
Gallery
always
free.
good to see the painting in the flesh.
Absolutely. So shall we begin? Get that first clip going, or would you like to?
Please. Yeah, let's turn the lights off. That'd be really nice.
Regarde, il se réveille.
Appelle le docteur Cocheton, vite.
Vous avez demandé une chambre 119.
Monsieur Bobby, gardez les yeux ouverts. Gardez les yeux ouverts.
It's really just a tremendous and memorable opening to a film, and I think everyone here has probably seen this film, which is a story of a 43-year-old man who has a stroke and suffers from locked-in syndrome. And the only way that he can communicate really is through the blinking of his eye. And you really start the film as a story about images and about seeing and about the inside of the body. And I just want to begin by talking to you a little bit about how you conceptualize telling the story of this man from the inside, literally from inside of his head.
Well, when you think about making films, or you think about making art, paintings, or whatever, when I think about it, I try to do something that I haven't seen before. Try to do something, or think of a way to do something, or get at something that hasn't been done before. And the notion that the guy couldn't move seemed to me pretty interesting, that you could see. But it didn't mean that his imagination couldn't move, that he could, what he was seeing wasn't moving, it was that he wasn't moving. But that being said, you can make decisions about how you want to frame something. If he can't pick his head up, you could cut people's heads off if you feel like it. So you're given the permission somehow to make a frame that if you didn't have those parameters, oh, well, how come you're framing this in this way? You're cutting the heads off. Or when my father died, I came into the room, must have come in a couple of seconds after he died, because the bile was coming out of his mouth and his nose, and his eyes were flickering, and I wondered if he could see me. And so in the film, when I shot the part where John Doe died, I tried to show what he was seeing also, because I wanted to know what my father was seeing, not what I was seeing. And there was I think it's very, for me, it's very interesting or very compelling to, for the audience to know what's inside of the character's mind, even though the other characters in the film don't know. And so when I was very interested in the book Perfume also, and I had written a script that never was used, but in my version of the script, Jean-Baptiste Grenouille climbs up to the top of this hill, and he can smell all the way to Egypt. And he can also smell all the way to Alaska. So I had written all of this, and then I couldn't make the film. I thought, well, if he can smell all the way there, this other guy can think his way to Alaska. And I felt very, well, I had a key. I mean, I needed to see, so I said to people who did archival research, can you get me some images of the ice shelf falling into the Alaskan Sea? And so they did, and I was playing it on a video machine, listening to Glenn Gould play Bach, and when it got to the end, the machine reversed the film, so I started watching the glaciers going backwards into out of the sea back into the air, and I thought, well, I understand how to tell this story. The guy was able to heal himself by telling his story. He was able to escape from his prison of his body because he was a writer, because he was able to do his work. So his imagination was his key to escape from that prison. And so that, for me, I mean, it was a movie about an artist. I mean, the guy became an artist through his sickness. And we can talk about the paintings in a moment, but why don't we watch, I think there's another clip from this movie, and then we can talk about the paintings that came out of this, because what happened was the movie that I made before this, I made during the rainy season in Mexico, and I shot 60 days in the rainy season without stopping once for weather. And we'd shoot 16, 18-hour days sometimes. So I had a very tough schedule, and I was kind of used to that. So in France, everybody likes to get off at a certain time, and we were, and I was living in the hospital where Jean Do was sick. So it was quite easy to finish on time. So I finished 2 weeks before schedule. We had to do the locations because everybody thought we were moving to Paris. There was a rich man that gave a building to the doctor for his son around the turn of the century, and his granddaughter couldn't really take care of the house. So there was this house in colonial disrepair, and I went into this library, and there must have been 100 X-rays from 1911 just strewn all over the place. And so I took the X-rays, and they looked like paintings to me. So I printed the X-rays on polyester, and then actually I left them like that for a couple of years. It took me a couple of years to actually put some ink on them. And I painted on them with an ink that had shellac in it. It was water-based. And because I wanted the paint to be porous and seem like liquid and be immersed in the surface and the structure of the painting. I also decided to use those images as the credits to the movie. So what you saw at the beginning were the X-rays that I found in the house near the hospital, and then I printed the names like that. I devised the typeface and printed the names for the credits. So when I'm working, I'm always seeing things that seem to get incorporated into something else that I'm doing, and one thing feeds the other. And
but you do tend to use more historic images, and these particular slides, which are the inside of a body, are so perfectly matched in a way to the theme of a story of a man literally locked inside of his body. But what do I mean, how do you think about the incorporation of those found images, those still images, into your films? Because they do tend to recur. I mean, almost all of your films have an element of the found image that's incorporated, either the still image or found footage of some kind.
Well, I think as things become part of our memory, everything that we digest is the same. So whether it be film that we've seen that somebody else made, or something a story that might have been told to me or been told to you, there's a million different ways that you can take imagery and give it the same equivalence to, say, some other kind of not only image. It could be a word. It could be. I have no hierarchical notion of a smudge of dirt, a plant, something, a whole phrase that somebody might say, the material that something's made out of. So somehow all of that coexists, and out of that non-hierarchical notion of looking at the world, I think I come up with my version of meaning, or my personal selection of language. And so that also makes me free to find different kinds of imagery. I mean, we'll look at these paintings now, but later at the end you'll see another painting that says Bez on it, and it's much more colorful. But I was in a yoga class, and there was a poster of Shiva on the wall. I wasn't very good at the yoga, but the yoga teacher was very nice, and I asked him if I could have the poster, and I photographed it, printed it, and made a group of pictures where I kind of extrapolated on all the events that were occurring around Shiva. There's no logic at all to it, but obviously I trust my intuition, and there's some things that just are not nameable that filter into whatever I'm doing. So, but actually, why don't we watch the next clip, and then we'll see how that actually filters into the movies, and then how it filters back into making paintings.
Now the next clip we have is actually Basquiat.
So let's not watch that. Can we
go ahead to the second diving bell clip?
If not,
guys upstairs.
if it's difficult, we don't care, and we'll do whatever you say. What was the next clip?
It was about Basquiat. I mean, and really, I think the connection that is so interesting is, as you're talking about the incorporation of these stories and these objects and finds, they're really very personal, and you had a very personal connection to him that comes out in the telling of his story, which is also sort of your story as well.
Well, so let's watch whatever you have, and then we'll talk about that.
Okay. We're moving on to Basquiat.
And we'll turn the light up, but we're never really moving anywhere.
Is that the best you have?
Yes, it's the best.
I'll take the whole 10.
It's $3,000.
Hey, Andy, can I get $3,000 for this camera?
Okay, tell us about that scene.
Well, I was actually the guy that lent him the $3,000. Why did we show that? Just to show that I'm a funny person.
Well, yes. I mean, and also that you've got David Bowie in the role of Andy Warhol, and I think it's just it's really a moment of levity too in a film that certainly has its serious, grave moments. I mean, this is an artist who met a tragic end and was, in a way, the victim of the art world, which is, I think, something that comes out. And this moment is one where he's having this transaction. He's trying to buy caviar. He's finally made it, and he's still confronting the matter of his race. So it's also a way of addressing that issue, but in a way that's got some levity to it. And yeah. How did you happen to cast David Bowie in the role of Warhol? How did that come about?
Well, I thought it was very hard to have an actor play Andy, because you think, oh well, that's the actor playing Andy. But I thought if I had David Bowie playing Andy, you could have sort of a doppelganger. Like, is it Andy playing David Bowie or David Bowie playing Andy? And the fact that it was David Bowie was the real guy was still there. And David was very, very, I thought he did a great job also. Sure, he had a funny accent. He didn't sound exactly like Andy or whatever, but he was David Bowie. And
he had all of the actual...
The foundation gave me all of Andy's clothes and his wig and his glasses, and I had all of the stuff that Andy took to the hospital. And they were extremely, well, he was a good friend of mine. And they were extremely nice to me. And what else could I say about that scene? What's the name of the actor who played the guy who was selling the caviar? He became very famous. He was on television. He got a exactly, Michael Badalucco. He's a great guy. And I also so I usually write the movies that I make also. So all of that stuff is stuff I just hear, and even in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, which was written by Ron Harwood, they asked how I worked with him. My girlfriend actually said to me, just say that your work started when his work stopped. But anyway, but Jean-Dominique Bauby really wrote the script, even though he wasn't there. But there were things that needed to be in the movie that, because I think what happens sometimes is two people can read the same thing, but obviously they come away from it with a different experience. And I think Ron Harwood's concept of The Diving Bell and the Butterfly was that when John Doe would find out what happened the day that he had his attack, something would be answered. But it wasn't a thriller, and there was nothing to be revealed in that. What was interesting is that through the process of writing this thing and the transference from what was going on inside of him to somebody that was outside of him, that really was the way that he was able to come to grips with death and also with being reborn, in a sense, because I think that he felt that when he was healthy, he actually was not alive, and through his accident, through his sickness, he actually became conscious. So I'm sure we'll talk about Jean-Michel a little bit more in a way, but why don't we see what the next clip is, and then we'll come back to this, because there's so many other things.
Well, the next clip is the Diving Bell clip, which happens at the very end of the film. So we've just seen the beginning of the film. Now we're going to see the end of the film. And I think it picks up on many of those themes that you just mentioned.
Perfect.
So.
Vamos, afuera.
Truth is that there is no possibility of rehabilitating a fagot. How many times have we confiscated this counter-revolutionary poop?
So you've said you loved making this film, and watching those scenes, particularly with Johnny Depp playing Bon Bon and then Lieutenant, you can imagine that a lot of that fun just came from working with the actors, just working with this amazing cast. And just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the experience of working with Javier and Johnny Depp. And I know it was at times a very intense process for you, particularly looking at that cell scene. Right. But there are also moments of just tremendous pleasure and sensuality and fun. And I think...
Yeah, well, when it says that the movie is directed by Julian Schnabel, that's not really true. It's really directed by, or it's really made by Javier Bardem and Julian Schnabel, or Johnny Depp and Julian Schnabel, or Matthew Elmrick, and it's something that you don't do by yourself, and they can do something that I can't do. But if I was just a painter, they might like my paintings, but they might have to listen to me. If I'm the director, they have to do what I say, or they trust me to do what I say, and then my job is not to let them slip through the cracks if they open themselves up to the vulnerability and their sense of humor or whatever the possibilities are that we could invent in those situations. When Javier went into that cell, he doesn't have claustrophobia, and he was sitting there like he was waiting for a bus. So I was looking at the monitor and wondering what to do, and I said to my assistant director, whatever you do, don't open the door. So he said to his brother, who was his assistant, anybody that touches the door gets fired. So I went inside the cell with Javier and did a few things, and then after 5 minutes, they opened the door. Javier said to me, "You're a great actor." I said, "I'm not a great actor, I have claustrophobia." So I guess it's method directing. I locked myself in the room with him and I went absolutely berserk. I was trying to breathe through the cracks, my eyes were rolling in my head. And so I think that when you make art, you have to, or the way that I do it, you put yourself into it and you use whatever that is, everything that you know and you don't know in order to do that. When we did the scene where he walks through, I thought it was one of the great moments when Javier's walking through, he's laughing his head off because he's stoned on hallucinogenics, and he was trying to kill himself. But I was thinking, how do you do a jail scene to where it's not like other scenes that you've seen? I thought, well, if this guy goes into prison and he's laughing his head off when this occurs, that would be good. And he's such an amazing actor that you can just, there were 150 guys in those cells, and they were yelling at him. They were yelling, "Puto," which means homo, and he was yelling back, "Pulpo," which means octopus. And they were screaming at each other, and the whole level of energy was quite mad in there. And Johnny is so smart that, you know, I wrote "Patria o Muerte" as a tattoo on his neck, and my daughter Lola, we were there trying on wigs and finding. But we shot all of that in just a couple of days. And so being a painter,
the weather was so dramatic.
I mean, all of that, exactly. When he walks into the prison, if I would have written down that I wanted to have a wide shot like that where it was raining, budget would say, well, it's going to cost $50,000 to do that. We can't do that. But just using weather, using the circumstances, and I think that it's like a found object, the weather or people. People react to something, you see something in somebody's character that they're willing to do something, or you see what they're good at, and I mean, you have to ask questions. There's a scene in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. I mean, actually won a scientific award, the Sloan Foundation Award for Science, because of The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, because it was so accurate what was happening in the hospital. But I don't know anything about that. I just kept asking the nurse, well, how are his hands? He just has hands on the bed. What did you do to keep, oh, there was foam on the bed, or was there a humidifier in here? And I just kept asking people questions. And so I hired his nurse to be his nurse, and his physiotherapist to be his physiotherapist, and basically people know their job, and it's real. So.
How did it become real for the actor playing Jean Do? Because in the Ronaldo character in Before Night Falls is so outward and expressive, but the Jean Do character is so obviously so inward and has virtually no movement. I mean, communicating through the movement of an eye. I mean, how did you direct that kind of character?
Well, I mean, all of these limitations, it's just as if you're a painter and you are trying to invent a way for yourself to work, and you might limit your palette to just a couple of colors, or decide what kind of material you want to paint on. And that can be a group of paintings, and maybe all that information has to be posited there, and then something else doesn't go in those paintings, and you make another group of things. So in this case, the people don't know what he thinks, but the audience does. I built a sound stage, a box where Matthew could stay, because I was the person behind the camera, or there was the cameraman was there, because it was in the first person. I mean, the actors are talking to a camera, they're not talking to him. So he's in a box and he could hear what they're saying, but they can't hear what he's saying. So I said, just say whatever you want to say. And he's got this great imagination. He's French and he's very, very funny. And so he could ad-lib whatever he wanted to say. So a lot of the writing in there is Matthew just saying whatever he wanted to these girls. And you feel like you're with him, you know what he's thinking, and he is moving. His body's not moving, but he's doing something else. Now that's one of your senses that's being taken care of. As in the process of doing that movie, one thing that occurred, he had to stay still a lot. And when somebody doesn't move, you think they're not there. And after a while, they start feeling like they're not there also. So a different thing happens to their, and I think artists like Chris Burden or Vito Acconci or Joseph Beuys did things like that. Their exercises and that kind of notions of stillness, notions of an interior. It's amazing, because I do have claustrophobia, and I couldn't have done what Javier did. And when Mathieu went under the water in the diving bell, you know why Jean Dot picked the metaphor of the diving bell, because if you've seen it, it's really a very medieval contraption. You're walking on the bottom of the ocean with that. The helmet is bolted to your chest, and if you have, and it is claustrophobic, and you cannot get out of there. And at one moment there was a guy filming who didn't understand the hand movements, and Matthew was doing something, and he tried to pull Matthew out of the water, which was very, very dangerous. The only time I saw Matthew being angry is when they took the helmet off. He said, "I'm acting." And I the walkie-talkie wasn't working, and I could just communicate with him. I'd ask him if he was okay through the air hose. Anyway, so there's a physical aspect to this, that these actors, a temperament, physical catharsis that occurs for these people, and they're really being there, and they're not. There's not really any acting going on. They're people in situations, and they're reacting to that. So, my way of doing it is, I throw everybody in the hole. I jump in with them, and if we can crawl out, we get to go home at the end of the day.
Now, the Diving Bell and Before Night Falls and Miral are all based on books. I mean, how closely do you feel? I mean, to what extent do you take liberties with these texts, and how closely do you want to stay to the original narrative of, say, the Jean Dot character? And when do you feel like you absolutely must stay to the facts, and at what moments did you really need to break away from the existing storyline to infuse the narrative with drama or a transition of some kind?
Well, for example, when you see the bowls of soap,
yeah,
that was something that was an image that I saw in my head. It wasn't something that was described. He said that they came to me in forms of balls of soap, but the notion of seeing all these hands swinging those balls is sort of illogical, obviously. It's not the same thing as me passing one ball to your cell and then passing the next one over there. So there's a kind of liberty taken there. When he says that Michelangelo was a homosexual, so was Leonardo da Vinci and Shakespeare. I said that Shakespeare was a homosexual. That wasn't in, I thought it was funny to call Shakespeare homosexual. You know, that line about that the gay inmates would turn El Moro into a nightclub. He was so beautiful that he made everybody feel like they were in the movies. That was something that I thought, you know, just things, you hear things from different movies, you hear things that just are floating around in your consciousness that you can pick up and select. And I remember when I was working on it, and this, one of the guys who I was writing with, who was doing more of the research about the political system. Well, what's going on in the prison? This is not like the movie at all. Why? I said, that's okay. That's just, and so people don't necessarily know what you're doing. When I shot Basquiat, I shot 90,000 running feet of the movie. That's very little. Mostly a short movie is 250,000 feet. When I just treat it as a found object, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. It was the first movie I ever made, and I just felt, okay, this is what I've got. Now I'll try to turn this into something.
Do you feel like your background as a visual artist enabled you to be sort of fast and loose with some of those decisions and maybe more spontaneous than some of your peers in the movie business?
I don't think I'm in the movie business,
okay,
actually.
Well.
But absolutely. I have a different approach, I guess. What's the next thing? Let's see what the next.
The next thing is the. So we go back to the diving bell this time. I feel like I should look up and say right.
No. It's good. We didn't know, but you see, we don't care. Because
I do. I care.
Okay, I'm sorry, dear. It's all part of the same thing somehow. Okay. All right. So why don't we?
Do you want to introduce this scene?
Scene? Yes, the scene. Well, the beauty in this scene is really, and I'd like to take credit for that. No. What I'd like to take credit for actually is taking Jean Doe's words and putting them back into the script, because that was missing. And I think that Jean Doe really wrote this, not Ron Harwood and not me. And it's my job to sort of just to keep the integrity of what I think the work is as best I can. And this is really, and I'd like to talk about this actually after we see it, not before. Because after we see it, then we'll really have something to talk about. It's boring for people to tell you what you're going to see, and then you see it. So let's see it.
Le long du golfe clair a des reflets d'argent, la mer, des reflets songeants, la pluie, la mer, au ciel d'été, son fond et de l'emboutons, avec les gens.
So I'm imagining a man's death from the inside, and the experience, I guess, of reliving one's moments of life in the moment of death, which is so beautifully encapsulated in those scenes, in which the music plays such a critical role in the sound of his life. If it's the moment he's having the stroke and the press of the foot on the gas pedal, to the sounds of voices in the hospital room, all narrating those final moments. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you distilled those moments and brought them together in the way that you did in that final sequence of scenes.
Go out in the landscape, find the road, put the metal piece of that kind of weird piece of cast iron that was on the edge as if it was some sort of a road map. I don't know what makes me decide to make the camera pan one way to the other, because most of the time if you drive out into the countryside, you think you're safe. There's not a lot of people there. You think it's a very warm and encouraging place to be that's not full of danger. But if you have a stroke and you're in the middle of the countryside during actually a strike, in which he was, it's really a dangerous place to be. And there's things happen as you're making a movie also. For example, that boy was thinking too much. And I needed to think about something or change or do something to make that scene work. So my boys were actually with me in Paris, and my wife enrolled them in a soccer team, but they didn't have hair on their penises yet. And they were in a soccer team with guys that were older than them, and they were intimidated and they didn't want to shower. So they complained to her, and she said she was going to talk to me about it. And I said I'd talk to the coach, but she didn't want me to do that. But it didn't ever work out, and so they were kicked off the team. So I walked in the morning, and I said to Matthew, just ask the kid if he's got hair on his dick, and talk to him about the football thing, because he knew what was happening with the kids. No problem. Picked him up, they got in the car, asked him those questions, the kid just answered him, he didn't even know he was acting. And we do talk about silly things right before something terrible happens to us sometimes. And so it's an accumulation of things. I heard this song by the Dirt Bombs. I don't know where, but I thought, okay, I need that particular song for the car. And I always loved the credits to 400 Blows by Truffaut. And I wanted to use a scene from the movie that actually I ended up using a football game instead. But since I had the rights, I thought, God, I can use the music, and I can shoot Paris, and I can shoot the trees, and I can shoot. So you have all of these fragments of things that are signifiers, and that are things that, and you just take all of them, or I do, and just put them together. And I also had a dilemma. I mean, if somebody was going to tell me that I wrote a book, if I wrote a book, and and my wife said to me as I was dying, do you want to know what the critics said? I would say, fuck no. But in his case, he really was interested to know that he was able to write that book, so he would have said yes. But I had this big dilemma inside of myself. Do I want this guy to say, yeah, I want to know, or do I want him to say no? So in talking to Bernard Chapuis, who was his best friend, he said there was a moment when they were there and they were talking to, each person went in to talk to Jean Doe for a little bit. And when they went in, his eye stayed open. They were talking to him, but he was dead. So I thought, perfect for me. He's dead, he doesn't have to answer. And so I have the last moment, and I was imagining, like I said earlier, I was thinking about when my father died, and so I imagine that's what my father was seeing, these kind of flickering lights going off as you were. So, and then the song actually at the end is by Joe Strummer, who died before that record came out. His wife, Luce Miller, actually mixed that. He died of a brain hemorrhage. And so I dedicated the movie to my father and to Jean-Pierre Cassel, who died before he never saw the movie finished, and to Patrick Genet's son, who died in a car accident while we were making the movie. But
can you talk just for a minute about the actual photography and the way that the camera, just in that short clip that we saw, the way that the camera's being treated, and it's frenetic at moments where it's swinging back and forth, and then another minute you're looking down on the heads of the two passengers in the car.
Right.
And that other interesting scene, which we talked about earlier, that reminded me of a Rodchenko photograph, you know, getting out of Paris and the street goes
sideways.
You know, I mean, there are all of these really dramatic ways in which the visuals of the film are, again, feeding sort of the topsy-turvy emotions that you're experiencing as you're watching it, because it's a flashback, you know something bad is about to happen. So that relationship between the sort of almost herky-jerky motion of the camera and the way that you know, the film is climaxing in terms of the emotion and the sensibility.
Well, first of all, I worked with Janusz Kaminski, who was a great DP, but he wasn't working the camera most of the time. And the cameraman, actually, I think I almost lost him a few times. I mean, I was thinking to myself, when do I get enough credit where these people will just follow me along in this journey? Because there were some moments where they just thought, you know, this weird American artist, he's just crazy as a bug, and he doesn't know what he's doing. One time the guy said to me, oh, there's 3 ways to shoot people riding in a car. Well, I said, well, there's 3 ways to do it. Let's just stop making the movie right now. I said, so what do you want me to do? I said, well, why don't you lie in the passenger seat on your head and shoot up at him? That would be a good way to start. Which he did. And not only that, but after a while, and it was not without, you know, because everybody learns this craft in a very professional way, and they are out of their comfort zone. They've been taught a certain way, and so I wanted this guy to hang. I mean, he started to get so into it that he was a little dangerous because he was getting carried away, hanging outside. I wanted, if you look at any of my movies, there's always a convertible in all of the movies. I only will have convertibles, and because I want to see the trees, I want to see the sky, so this guy was hanging out of this. He was great. I mean, he was a great cameraman, but he needed to know that he could do whatever he wanted to do. And finally, when we got to the scene where Jean Doe's having the attack, he was a master by the time we got to that point. And I remember saying to him, so did you get it? And he said to me, yeah, but what about the acting? I said, don't worry about that. And at the end, I think he was very happy with his work. And Janusz knew a lot about the camera, so there's nothing done in special effects afterwards. We're shooting on top of film inside the camera when that flickering is going on. And but I see the images in my head, and I kind of, and I hear the music in my head also. So
as it's unfolding. I mean,
when I shoot things, I'm always listening to, when I'm watching the outtakes, I'm always listening to music and trying different things. And I remember there was a woman who worked for me who was trying to steal my computer. And all of a sudden, all the music I had on it was erased. And supposedly it was sent to Amsterdam, and there was just one bit of music on the computer, and I'm playing it while I'm watching the scene, and it was the piano music by Paul Cantelan. And I think, some weird geek in a computer shop in Amsterdam, and he's putting a virus into my computer, and he wants me to hear this music. I said to John Kilk, I said, do you know what music this is? And he said, no, I'll ask. I said, don't ask anybody. This sounds famous. And later we found out that it had something to do with Supervision, which is this woman, Sue Jacobs, who's worked for me before. And I put somebody on the phone and said, what is this? Is this Paul Cantelan? She said yes, and I thought, well, that's the soundtrack. So I kind of stumble over everything, and there's no, you get a basic plan, and then I think the thing that's similar to painting for me is I want a surprise to happen. I want something to happen that and if you lean towards a divine light, that can happen.
Shall we talk about your most recent surprise, Miral, which screamed here last night? We have one more clip to look at before we look at some slides.
How's everybody doing? You okay? Is it getting a little tedious? I'm not looking for a compliment. I just don't want to bore you. We tried to make the format actually work where we could talk about something. And what's interesting is to actually see these things. They kind of function like paintings. it doesn't matter if you know the beginning and the end of a movie of mine. You can look at it, and there are these different moments where things occur, and you could come back to them because it's the voyage of getting there that is filled with all that stuff. It's not just, okay, I know what that's about, and I don't want to chew your food for you, so I like everybody to have a first-person experience when they're watching the movies. Yeah, let's do the other one, and then we can talk about painting, or we can just keep going. How does that sound?
Good. So a very different film, and different part of the world, different set of conflicts, and you're identifying in Miral with women, and in particular this one 16-year-old girl who is a Palestinian and literally caught in the crossfire of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the kind of change this film represents for you in terms of your filmmaking.
Well, I think every movie that I made was different. And the same way that I don't want to make the same painting all the time, I make movies that I think that probably I'd be the only person that would make them. They don't really, I mean, Brian Grazer asked me to direct, what's it called? American Gangster. Or somebody asked me if I wanted to do, Catch Me If You Can, or 8 Mile. These are just things that they didn't need me to do. And so the movies that I've made, I made because I felt a responsibility. I knew Jean-Michel, and I thought I owed it to him to kind of, since I survived and he didn't, to kind of tell that story. I mean, I was in the basement with him. I don't think it was a very radical movie, I just knew my topic. And then in Ronaldo's case, I felt that I knew something about the Cuban Revolution and about being an artist. That was something that was, that permitted me to tell that story. And in John Doe's case, my father was locked inside of his body, so he was dying, and I thought I could help him with his fear of death. And it helped me do it through that also. And in the case of Miral, my mother was the president of Hadassah in Brooklyn, 1948, first president in Brooklyn. And she believed in the state of Israel, and she fought for that, and she was a good woman who, there are a lot of people that do, and I just feel that since 1948, it just tells the story of 4 different women living in the struggle, in the conflict, from 48 to 1993. But everything kind of stopped in 1993, 1994, because the Oslo Agreement was never honored. And so now it's 2011, 63 years after the birth of the State of Israel, and we're no closer to having a solution. And there is a democracy in Israel, but not for Palestinian people.
And how did the story of this one particular individual, this child in effect, help to shape your story around that subject?
I met a woman who wrote this book, and they were going to make a movie for Italian television out of it, and she asked me if I would look at the script. I said I probably won't like it, but just send it to me. I was having a show of paintings at the Palazzo Venezia in Rome, and she sent me the script, and I read it, and I didn't like it, but it seemed to me that it was based on a really good book. And I read the book, and I said, well, that's more of a script than the script. And I felt it was my responsibility to do it, and I hadn't made a movie about, I mean, I guess I made a movie about women when I did The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. I thought it was about a crippled guy, but it was really about a man's
The women around him.
image of women and how much we depend on them and how we. Anyway, I thought I would tell this story through the point of view of this 16-year-old Palestinian girl, and so that's it.
And your daughter was in the film, too. And your kids have been in a number of the films that you've made over the years. Your son was in Before Night Falls, and Stella becomes Miral's friend.
Right. Stella, my daughter Stella is a good actress. She's in a movie that Oren Moverman just, it's not out yet, it's called Rampart with Woody Harrelson about Rodney King moment and the corruption in the LA police department. But she plays the good Jewish girl in Miral. I think we also now. I think we're going to show you just a couple of images of some paintings.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
And because I can talk about my first trip to Israel and Palestine, which was in 1987.
Shall we go straight to those slides?
Let's go back. Where were we? There was. What's the first one?
You want to look at these paintings?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That painting is actually, it's 16 feet across, and there's a tarp that was left outside. It was covering a boat in Mystic, Connecticut. I bought 19 tarps from a guy in the port, and when I was in Israel in 1987, I had a show at the Jerusalem Museum. And I really didn't see much of Israel or Palestine when I was there. It was more about me going there and telling young artists about myself. And I didn't get to learn anything really about them, which was too bad. But there was something that I saw out of the corner of my eye, and that's what stayed with me. And when I came home, I made 2 gate paintings. This one is called Palestine, and there's another one called Jerusalem. And there's no paint on these paintings. It's just dirt that these canvases have been left out in the rain. And this was a gate from an elevator, and I just took some wood and built these legs for these gates. And I thought this one was a little sturdier than the other one. But I had seen a frame, just a picture frame, that was hanging on another stretcher or some kind of wooden structure in the back of the museum. But that was the most iconic and resonant image for me. And I came home and I had made 19 16-foot square paintings that I showed at the CAPC in Bordeaux in 1988. I think I have an installation of this show. Probably, there you go. It's a place. It's an entrepollet. It was a place where they built boats. So I walked in there and I kind of looked at the space and I thought, all right, I'm going to make 19 paintings and they're going to go in each one of these archways. 3 of them were green. Most of them were purple and kind of a grayish color. There was one pink and brown one that says, it's a map of heaven and hell. It says Matilda at the top, Fine, which means end, and it says that you can't read it, but it says he sold all of his tickets to the Betty Ford Clinic. And I was very happy. I made those paintings out in Montauk, and I was very happy to, sometimes you don't want to paint the paintings the same way, have the same MO for each work. So there was a group of pictures in this cycle of 19 paintings that just had purple on them, and it's that one that says Harry, Daisy, and Bingo. Those are the names of some dogs that I knew that died. There's a painting called Swami G, which is on the other side of the Matilda painting, and that was painted on a painting that I found in a place called Saurkins on 6th Avenue, and they were closing. It was a German bar, and I made 2 paintings with paintings that somebody else had made, and I just put a purple dot, or I painted some purple on them. And I'm sorry I don't have more pictures of the rest of the room, but you get a pretty good idea. Anyway, the two gate paintings were in this show, and you'll see them in another incarnation, because I'm going to show you. Okay.
You want to talk about the AGO show?
Yeah, I had a show that closed in January. It went from September till January, and there are two paintings in that room. One is called Cortez, and essentially it's 11 by 16 feet. There's a big stain on it, so it sort of looks like a map of the world or something. I actually had a hole in my studio, and it was raining, and the rain made a beautiful stain, and I didn't want the stain to go away, so I took Damar varnish and linseed oil and painted the stain in. And I glued that piece of baldacchino from the 18th century on there, and I thought that was enough. That was a painting. And it's in a room. I did not make the bench, but I thought it was okay to put it in that room. And that on the left, looking very kind of modest and quiet there, is The Patients and the Doctors, which was the first plate painting from 1978. So I guess that the Cortez is from 1987, that's from 1978. I'm going to show you another picture of The Patients and the Doctors, but maybe not for a few moments. So let's just see some other rooms in this show. There's a plate painting called Australia from 1987, and I think it's in 87, and it's about 9 by 19.5 feet. And I was always interested in that story of Ned Kelly. He never had an Edwardian suit, but I kind of took some liberties and painted him kind of on a terrace in an Edwardian suit with his metal kind of tomb on his head. That's next to another painting. So that was a painting that I made instead of making a film. The other painting next to it is from 1975, and it's called Shoeshine for Vittorio De Sica. And there's a hole cut out of it, and it sort of looks like a wall, and there are two grooves that come out of the right side, and it sort of was inspired by this spiral staircase that was in the movie Shoeshine by Vittorio De Sica, which is, it begins with an image of the sea. And you're looking at the sea, and you don't know exactly what you're seeing, you just see the sea, and as the camera pulls back, you see little heads at the bottom. And then as the camera pulls back, you realize that they're kids in prison looking at an image of the sea, and the sea to me represented freedom. So anyway, these are just two paintings that happen to be in this picture.
Can I just quickly ask you, and I want to be sensitive to the time so that we can make time for people to ask some questions, but it's hard not to look at some of these plate paintings and know that they were really among the works that threw you into this new league in terms of your status as an artist, your presence in the art world, and you've asked us to not use the phrase meteoric rise, because in some ways it felt like it was just this huge moment for you where suddenly you are you're a part of the New York art scene, and it's a New York art scene that then sort of gets played out in the Basquiat film, in which you have a role of sorts towards the end. And I just wonder, now that you've had this retrospective and you're looking back, still actively painting, but in a very different mode, and we can maybe look at some of those paintings in a minute, but what is it like to revisit those plate paintings again, and to think about the mindset that you were in during that time in your life when you were making them?
Well, I think they look pretty radical when you see them still. I mean, this is just a picture of the painting, but if you walk into that room and you experience the picture, because they're very, when you get up close to them, they're they're totally abstract, and they're coming unglued as they're coalescing. So there's this, they're broken and they're together at the same time. So I think they look pretty untamed, which is good. You don't look at them and they go, oh, well that's, they don't fit into some domestic complacency. And let's see the next image. What is the next image?
Well, you've got some from...
Oh, there's a gate painting that's
Another
actually
gate painting.
hanging there, and a velvet painting called Platoon, with a, and there's the patients and the doctors, which that's the first plate painting. And so when I look at that painting, I'm encouraged. I think that I think it's a pity to actually not see it in real life, because it's just a picture of a painting we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
I guess when you watch movies, the movies are in their own format, so you're seeing them in this theater and it works for them. Paintings, you have to walk up and stand in front of. Mm-hmm. So if you go up and see the pictures that are here, there's a quality to the surface of them, the way they sit on the wall, the way they relate to every other object and the architecture. And so how do I feel about that? I feel pretty good about that.
Let's look at one more recent slide, and then I'm
let's go back. Let's go back to the other one, because that's a painting called The Sea, from 1981. Top of the picture's a little cropped there, but there's a bunch of Mexican pots in that one, and that painting was 9 by 14 feet. So the scale of the plates changed, and if I used regular plates, they got smaller. So the outside and the inside of a painting have a lot to do with each other and the character of each stroke. But obviously, what I liked was that these objects broke, if I would paint over them, it would stilt the mark making, and it would change the way that, so there would be a surprise in that. There would be something that was unexpected that would happen.
But how did you actually come upon this material? Because it's so singular to your painting.
Desperation. I mean, I was trying to make a painting I hadn't seen before. And I went to the Park Güell in Barcelona, and there were these ceramics in the seats going around the park. And they're very decorative.
The Gaudi one.
The Gaudi. But after I left there, I went to a crummy restaurant that had a terrible mosaic on the wall that was sort of white. And I thought, you know, if I could get a hold of some plates. I was in this crummy hotel room, $2.50 a night, and there was a closet that was a beautiful size, perfect anthropomorphic size. You could put your arms across it, it receded back to the wall, and I thought, if I could cover this closet with plates, then I think I could paint on top of that. That would be something I hadn't seen. So I went back to New York City and asked a friend of mine to build the armature, and I went to the Salvation Army. And they hire disabled people, so there was a dwarf who was working there, and he was loading these plates into this box, and he couldn't get his arms down to the bottom of the box. I said, just drop them, I'm going to break them anyway. And he did.
So chance effect you were introducing there with your painting.
So anyway, obviously these are Mexican pots that are in this particular painting, set into foam and Bondo, which is auto body putty. Now let's go to the next image. So sometimes what happens is, instead of using plates or pots or whatever, I mean, there was a postcard that was lying around somewhere of Africa and at somebody's house, and I asked if I could have that, and printed it on polyester, and then I put a white mark on it and wrote, "In this town, you're a one-eyed Jack. I've seen your other side," which is what Marlon Brando says to Karl Malden in One-Eyed Jacks. And so I made 3 paintings, and I thought trees don't necessarily have to come out of the bottom of the painting. I mean, there's no gravity in painting. You can decide where anything you want. And so this kind of material is something that I've been using for a while. There are many different kinds of images, just like there could be many different kinds of images on plate paintings, but okay, this is one. That is an image of Sheikha Moza of Qatar turned on her side, and I found this painting in a junk store that so I painted a painting of the painting on top of her face, and it's the painter with the muse he'll never meet. because there's no way in the world this guy would have met Sheikh Mosa except if he was in that painting. Let's go back for 1 second. It's a pity. I always think it's a pity to look at paintings in this format. But I did like painting the frame, just putting a white line and a couple dots to paint the edge of the canvas on that stretcher. And there's actually the sword of Damocles, which is a bone hanging over the head of that guy. I made 3 paintings with this format.
Mm-hmm.
And then I made one.
And this subject.
Yes, and I made one painting of, she was a little bit busy, and I usually paint from life. So I thought, okay, there was a state photograph that she had of herself with this turban, and I thought it was kind of funny, and I wanted to work against that, or I liked the noise of that and the contrast between that and what I painted on top of it. And then I ended up making one painting of her from that. So I painted a large head that looked kind of like a girl with no eyes painting, but I don't have a picture of it here. So let's see the next one. That painting is from this summer, and it's, I guess it's 12.5 feet tall. And so the image is, again, it's printed. We looked at the X-ray paintings earlier, right?
Yeah.
It's done the same way. It's printed on this polyester material. There's some resin that's on it where I painted the pink and white over this. It looks like gold. And I mean, I don't know what it means, and I don't know what those things are, but there's blue lines coming out of the nose of that Shiva and some other shapes, and it says Bez on it. And does anybody know the band the Happy Mondays? Yes. Well, okay, I'm glad somebody. Anyway, so Bez was a guy who was in the audience. He was always dancing in his place, and he doesn't sing or anything. He took him into the band. So I thought Bez deserved to have his name on the painting.
Actually, Bez means without in Russian.
Yes, and Bez means fuck in French.
Okay, with that, let's bring the lights up and have some conversation.
But it's not spelled B-E-Z.
Okay, let's take some questions.
That was quick. This guy's got his arm very quick over there.
Okay, we need to let someone with the mic get to you.
Can we turn that light off now, please? Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
Right over here.
How's everybody doing? Okay? All right. Okay. Just anybody want to go home? You can walk out now. My feelings won't get hurt.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. See you. Okay.
First off, I'd like to thank you for coming here tonight. This has really been a fantastic opportunity to hear you talk about your work and the process through which you create. My question is, why do you feel compelled to make films that you yourself can only make, instead of doing something like Catch Me If You Can or American Gangster, where you could probably make a lot of money?
Make a lot of money. I'm not interested in, I don't make art to make money. I mean, that's not my goal. I'm not saying that I want to be broke, and it doesn't cost money to live, but it's not my goal. And I think probably the fact that I don't care if I make money makes my movies different than most movies, because if many movies are judged by how many tickets you're selling, then I'm a failure. But if you ask me if I'd rather be the author of Before Night Falls or Gladiator, and Gladiator won Best Picture that year, and Russell Crowe won Best Actor that year, I would rather have made Before Night Falls. And Javier Bardem, I said to Javier when we were at the Oscars, I said, you know, it's a rigged game, but you did the work. The work is the prize. And, you know, I've been nominated or won some awards or whatever, but the awards, all that stuff, you know, I guess you don't really care about getting an award until you think they might give you one. but it's really a waste of time. But it is nice when, I really felt though that this particular movie, Miral, people need to see it because we need to stop the war over there. It's been just too long, and we need to discuss this. We need to check ourselves. We can't blanketly support things that, you know, we have to contradict our tribe sometimes. That doesn't mean we're a traitor. And it just, and we have to look at people as human beings. And if we're free in this country, we're not free if we're supporting a war against people that don't have any rights. It's just, our tax dollars are paying for that. And I don't really care about the money, but I find it, I think it has nothing to do with what our, what is it, our mandate is as Americans living in a free country, supposedly.
Anybody over here?
Actually, I'm a pretty good example of a free person living in this country, able to do this, because if I did it somewhere else, I probably would end up in jail. I mean, Yitzhak Rabin got shot in the head because he wanted to end the settlements. He was a good man. Anyway. Yes?
I've got a couple of questions. First, it's been interesting to hear you talk tonight and feel your presence, because it's so different than what I've read about you in person. The early Julian Schnabel, being very sort of arrogant, come to the front of the art scene, sort of take it over. And I don't get anything of that from you tonight. And I'm wondering, did you change and sort of grow over time? Was that completely erroneous? And then aside to that, I'm curious, as an artist, I understand you're sort of choosing things that are not mainstream in terms of your subject matter. But what do you think out of another artist-director like Matthew Barney, who completely sort of dissolves traditional narrative? And his works are like looking at art, in that you're immersed in something and your mind isn't sort of following the story.
One, I think Matthew Barney is a very talented guy. And actually, I saw the pieces that were up here, and I think they're good. I think he's got a unique vision.
Your arrogance.
But at the same time, for myself, I wanted to make movies that actually, I like sitting in a movie theater for 2 hours, and I wanted to see if I could do that. And so for me, I thought I'd separate between what movies were and what my paintings were. And so I don't feel like showing my movies in an art gallery. I'd rather put them in a movie theater. And I never had a camera or took any photographs of anybody before I made the movie. I didn't have a video camera either. So it was something that I thought other people needed a camera. I just memorized what I was looking at. And so then what happened is a guy started to interview me about Jean-Michel, and I felt like I needed to take over because he was a tourist, and it was not going to be fair to Jean-Michel. So I got conscripted into the job. I mean, I was always a big movie fan. I never thought I was going to be a movie director. And so, but it is electronic friendly, and people kind of, they can, as a movie director, I think people can see the way characters behave in your movie, so they can tell what you're like more. I think if you show them a painting of some wood and a stain, and they look at it, they might think, maybe you don't give a shit what they think, and they might get pissed off at you. I think what happened was when I showed with Leo Castelli in 1981, he hadn't taken an artist into the gallery in 12 years. And I think a lot of the stuff that occurred around that had to do with jealousy, and also I didn't nurture a lot of relation. I'm not that polite, and if I eat with you, it means I like you. I don't eat with somebody because I think it's going to benefit my career. I don't see art as a career. I came here actually because I liked her. I didn't think I'm going to come to the Walker, it's going to do something for my career, or why did I do this? I mean, I have kind of a busy schedule right now, or whatever, but she came to the studio and was curious, and she was really smart, and I thought, you know what, if somebody's interested and they want to talk about art, or they care about what they're doing, I'm supposed to support that. And that's why I'm sitting here right now. And I'm not saying it for any other reason other than it's true, so you're lucky to have her here. And I've had a great time being here. I've basically stayed in my room half the time and walked around here the other half, but I like the way the air, there's something in the air here that's, I guess the air in New York, you don't notice that it's impure until you come here. I kept smelling something and it feels like there's a lake or there's water or there's something. It smells like, kind of like Switzerland around here. But anyway, I don't know. Many people have said that, and it sounds a little bit self-serving to say I'm not really like that. I'm probably a total asshole and very disagreeable, and it's all that stuff they said about me is deserved.
Okay, anyone over on this side?
Yeah, I thought Berlin was beautiful. You did a great job. And I was just wondering, was there any discussion with Louis prior to that? I mean, the album itself was pretty much a script, but going about it any other ways that Howard was just filming the performance. And also you mentioned listening to music while you're filming. Do you ever want to do any of your own music that you create, put that in your films as well? Do some double duty in that way?
Well, I work on the music I've worked on the music in all the films that I've made, and I made a record once called Every Silver Lining Has a Cloud, and it was a big failure. Actually, David Bowie really liked it, and he played it for somebody, and he didn't say that I made it. And he said, well, this kid is great. And he said, well, Julian Schnabel made it. He said, oh, man, that's just, you know, that's shit. And I don't think people like it if you do too many things. And the record wasn't great. I thought that it was better when it was on 4-track, and it got overmixed. But Bill Laswell worked on it. It just became too overproduced. But I do like, I love Tom Waits. He's a good friend of mine. And what happened with Lou is I knew that record Berlin better than anybody on the planet. And Lou knew that. I knew stuff about it that Lou didn't remember. And I always thought about making a movie about Berlin. And I just was, my friend Bob Williamson once said to me, do you ever find that life is taking up all your time? So I was a little busy, and I was actually going to Paris to shoot The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And Lou said, I got to do this. And this woman, what's her name? Susan, I can't remember her last name right now, but she ran the St. Anne's warehouse. And he wanted to do this, and I just had to say yes because I owed it to him. Because that record was so important to me that I owed it to him. So I had all of these paintings that were, actually I printed this Chinese image. I was at somebody's house, there was a party, because I was having a show in Houston, and I went to the bathroom in this lady's house, and she had these images of Chinese prints on the wall. I didn't have a camera. I got a guy with an iPhone or some phone to take pictures of them, and I blew them up. And when it says, I lived in this hotel that had greenish walls, the bathroom in the hall. I thought, okay, these are the greenish walls to the hotel. So I brought him over to the studio. I hung a couch in the middle of the studio, and I had poured resin on these things. And I figured, okay, before I make paintings out of them, I'll use this for the set. Lou called it the Berlin Wall. So I used that for the set. And then my daughter Lola is super talented, and she made a film when she was 17 years old that had some extraordinary images. She's sort of like a young Tarkovsky or something, but she doesn't work enough. Anyway, And I was in Paris, and after shooting The Diving Bell, I asked Emmanuelle Seigner if she would come to New York, and Lola directed her as Caroline. I knew the scenes that I wanted to have in the movie. So I thought that the movie was kind of like Lou performing open heart surgery on himself. And so it looked as if he was using his own footage of his wife and the problems they had, and they were his home movies. And the incredible thing about that is Lou hadn't played this music for 35 years. Because when he did it, the record company said that it was proof that he was out of his mind. And it was the most depressing record ever made. And he was just so, it was an open wound. And to film him playing it the first time in 35 years with a guitar player who hadn't played with him all this time, I thought that would be an interesting moment to capture. So he played 4 days, and I put filled the audience, and because I wanted to be able to film from the audience, or have somebody on the stage so I could stick the camera inside of his nose. And I think it turned out pretty good. And I loved the record, and then he went off and played all over the world. He went off and played it, and I think it was a... So what do you do for your friends? What do they do for you? I mean, if you're lucky enough to know somebody like that, I think you owe them that. And it's funny because when I was making this last movie, I didn't really have the music yet that I was satisfied with. And Laurie Anderson gave me this viola music that I used as the leitmotif throughout the film Miral. Whenever, at the beginning, how many people saw Miral yesterday? Okay, so whenever this, that sonorous music, like when Hind found the children, right before Nadia goes to prison, when the building is being knocked down, when the girls are driving through the landscape, you hear that music, which seems to embody the whole dissonant, discordant, kind of high-pitched feeling that you have, this nervous feeling that you have there. And it was really Laurie's music that added to that. And they're great friends. And there's, you know, if you have a community of people that help you, you have to help them also.
Should we take one more?
Let's take 3 more.
All right, 3 more. We have run...
I've always been fascinated with a filmmaker's directorial debut, and I think it's pretty common to see with a lot of filmmakers that their first film, they had their whole life to make it, and it's very personal and biographical. And I guess I'm wondering if you'll ever retreat back to something that is as personal as Basquiat, where you know, it's filmed in your hometown, it's based on somebody that you know personally. I understand that you know, you live in San Sebastian, New York, part of the year. Would you ever consider either of those 2 places a backdrop for one of your future films?
That wouldn't be the criteria that I would use to make a movie. It's funny because when I went to Mexico to shoot Before Night Falls, somebody said to me, how does it feel to be away from home? Well, I grew up on the Mexican border. I moved from Brooklyn when I was 15, so working with Mexicans in Veracruz and in Merida was something that was I felt at home there. And actually, when I lived in Paris when I was younger, I wanted to have a show there. I wanted to be famous in Paris. I did have a show in the Centre Pompidou in 1987, but I was always thinking which gallery I wanted to show in, and when I came back to direct this movie, I was like a ghost. I didn't want anything from anybody. I didn't care. I walked into a restaurant that I used to eat in, and I looked at the guy, and he saw me in the Cherche Midi restaurant, which was across from a house I used to live in, and I was like Rip Van Winkle. The guy looked at me, and he kind of gave me a table. And he knew that we knew each other well, but we hadn't seen each other in a long time. I mean, in 13 years or whatever. But so I feel at home. I never feel at home, and I feel at home all the time. So I would never do that. I don't think that Basquiat was more personal to me than The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, because I think every one of these movies, there's a scene in Miral where the little girl is taken to the school. Her father takes her to school and he leaves, and she sees this suitcase sitting there and the door is closed and her father's not there. Well, when my mother took me to school the first day, I was very close to my mother, and she said she was going to the bathroom, and she left. And so I knew how that little girl felt because it happened to me. And so whatever movie I'm doing, whatever character you see, if there's a woman or a man or an old man or a baby or whatever, I'm all of those people in the movies. And I use whatever that is inside of myself to bounce off of that stuff. So it's not as obvious as it sounds. And I don't care about making a movie in San Sebastian or in, but what I did care about was actually having a show in San Sebastian. There was a building called the Tabacalera that had been closed since the turn of the century, maybe 1935. And I wanted to have a show in that building. I preferred to have a show in that building rather than the museum, the Guggenheim in Bilbao. So I reopened that building, and it cost $850,000 to do that. But I felt like it would be more important to have a show there for the people in San Sebastian that were so nice to me, because I wanted them to know what I did. I saw them every day, and I wanted to share my paintings with them. And that was important to me. But as far as making a movie over there, I don't feel compelled to do that. Go figure. I mean, just... Anybody else? Yes? Girl with the arm?
I got one, I guess, too. So.
Okay, the one in the middle, we'll do the two of you, and then unless somebody really has to say something after that, we'll... Come on.
Okay. Well, I think I can safely say that I'm not in the movie business. Considering why we're here, I thought it was pretty interesting that you said you're not. You kind of covered that. You made the record. I would think you'd say you're not in the music business, too. But I'm wondering if there's any other businesses that you aren't in that we can look forward to maybe coming up and hear about tonight.
That's a very nice way to put it. What's your name?
Steve.
Steve. I'm really interested in that painting. I'm sorry that you can't see it in the flesh. I'm really, I'm going to have a show at the Correr Museum in Venice this summer during the Biennale. It'll open on the 31st of May, but it'll be up for 4 months. And then I guess I'm going to have a show at the MoCA in about a year and a half, a retrospective at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. And I'll probably have a show in New York in about 9 months with Larry Gagosian on 24th Street. So what I'm really interested in is actually showing people my paintings, because I think they got a little distracted with these movies. And they thought that I didn't care about painting anymore. And in a way, it's funny because there's an article that I read in Art in America about the show that was in Canada. And the guy said, well, curators and museum people hadn't been thinking about my work for 20 years, and I didn't know that. And I felt bad. I felt bad for him because he said, I wished I could have seen these paintings. And I thought, God, I should have shown him some more. So I don't feel like making a movie for a while, and I think I just keep painting and making things. And I did build a building in the middle of all of that. Actually built a Venetian palazzo on 11th Street in New York. It sounds like a joke, and but somehow it got done. You know, you just have to do something every day. Yes, the girl in the middle?
Okay, so I'm going to try and make this short. When Before Night Falls came out, I was writing my dissertation and I was having writer's block. And seeing that movie really helped me work through the writer's block because I was writing my dissertation on Max Beckmann. And there was something about the sensibility of the scenes, the plot, the content of that film that really resonated with me, just looking at Beckmann's paintings constantly. And I wonder if you can maybe talk about whether Beckmann has influenced your painting, influenced your pictures,
Right.
your films. Say more, please.
Okay, well, that's a really good question. I think Max Beckmann's a great artist. I know his work super well. I'd seen the exhibition at the Whitechapel of the crucifixions of the triptychs, and I used to own a painting of Wolfgang Frommel, who was a Dutch poet. And I remember walking into this gallery. Grace Borgnicht owned the painting, and I said, "How much is it?" And she said, $90,000. I said, "Well, I'm an artist. You think you could give me?" And I mean, I didn't have a lot of money at the time. I said, "Can you give me a discount?" She said, "Okay, you could have it for 80." I said, "Can I pay it off over 6 months?" She said, "Yes." So she wrapped it up in some brown paper with a string, and I brought it home like I had a loaf of bread under my arm, and I had it for years. So I think there's a drama in Beckmann's paintings, and there was a conflict that was going on, and there was a kind of dreamlike quality that is happening in those pictures. They're haunted, and there's and it's funny because also if you think of that kind of black drawing that's there, and you think of some of the shadows in Javier Bardem's face and some of those things, and I also think about Caravaggio a lot, and there's a couple of moments there where you really can, you know, I actually made a painting of somebody by candlelight the other day. I mean, literally, there was a guy standing, I made a painting of a guy, an art dealer named Marco Voena, holding my head in his hand, like David and Goliath, my head cut off.
Judith and Holofernes.
Well, actually, yeah, well, both. I mean, but it was really David and Goliath. He's holding this head in his hand, and his blood's coming out of the neck, and he's standing there in a suit with his scarf over his, but I painted it by candlelight, just put two candles on the floor, and I don't know why more people don't paint by candlelight, because invariably you will end up with something interesting. I think if there's any painters in this room that want to mess around with that for even just a couple days or one day, I also had to do it with a long brush because it was so dark I couldn't see. And if I wanted to see what I was painting, so I taped the brush to a stick and I painted it like that. And I think all of these kinds of restrictions that you put on yourself, whether you're making a movie or whether you're painting a painting, give you another way to look at it, and maybe that's not going to be the great thing, but it could lead you to that next thing that you're going to do. Anybody else?
Okay. One more, maybe?
I mean, I don't mind talking if I'm actually in a good mood. Yes. Man right here with the glasses.
Once again, I'd like to thank you for being here. And I've always been fascinated by the 80s art scene in New York, and I wanted to know if you could just kind of talk a little bit about that.
Of the which scene?
The art scene in New York in the 80s. It just seemed like it was, you know, easier to be an artist back then. You guys just was freer, and like the city itself was just kind of more open to you guys just doing whatever you guys did.
Oh, I don't think that's true, actually. It was a lot of fun, but I think there's some really good artists in New York right now that are having, I mean, there's this group of artists called the Bruce High Quality Foundation. And they actually have a school also. I think it's in a bar somewhere that they're trying to get together. But they're very, very, very bright, and there's a real discussion about all sorts of things that they are having all the time. And I actually feel like there's a time right now, maybe I needed to wait 30 years. Actually, maybe I needed to wait 30 years for people to loosen up or do something to where I could kind of see things that I saw happening or felt like there was a dialogue that could take place that is actually happening now. I think Urs Fischer is a really good artist. And there's, I think Dan Colin, I don't know if you know who that is. There's a young painter named Dan Colin who paints bird shit paintings. And they're really good. They look kind of like Milton Resnick paintings. They're very thick, but it looks like bird shit that's caked on these things and they drip down. And it's very, there's a thing about the thing that you're painting being the subject is the object. And for example, when I made the Recognitions paintings, there were paintings that were painted on army tarps, and I wrote words on them that came out of the book The Recognitions by William Gaddis. And I thought the words that were written were the image, and were the subject, and were the object. And so I think there's a kind of, we got to a point, it's sort of a post-photographic moment now, finally, which I think is great, because I'm very tired of a lot of art that comes out of photography. At the same time, I love photography, but it depends on what photography. And it's always been hard to find painters that knew how to paint. And I can't think of too many. I think if we look over the past 50 years, we probably could name maybe 10 that we would all agree on. Andy Warhol would be one. I think, I don't know, is there anybody in this room that doesn't think Andy Warhol was a great artist? Don't be shy, I want to attack you. Is there anybody that doesn't think Andy Warhol was a great artist? That's amazing, because he really was a great artist, and everybody knows that. Now, he's been dead since 1986. 86? 87? 87, yeah. Been dead since 1987. And he didn't have a show at the Museum of Modern Art till after he was dead. And I remember painting this painting I painted of him, and he was standing in front of me, and I said, you know, you ought to paint more, man, because he was making movies and he was doing it. I said, you should paint because you're really good at it. And he thought that people didn't take him seriously. And that was amazing. But what a great artist. And as his work gets revealed and different shows happen, and you could look at the camouflage paintings, or you look at the Rorschach. I remember when the Rorschach test paintings came out, and I looked at them and people didn't, and I thought, this is really, really good. And it's interesting to see, and obviously there's always this kind of necrophiliac Mon Amour kind of thing, where there's a big feeding frenzy for Jean-Michel's work, really because he's dead. It's not, and there's a, you know, and the market has gone crazy, and there's some prices for certain things that don't warrant those kind of things. But out of all of the fallout and all of the bullshit and all of the greed or whatever, art is one of those things like grass. You can have cement that's put over it, but through the cracks, the grass will come up and there'll be art there. Because people need to make art, because it's not enough just to make money. It's not enough just to, whatever it is, you need that bit of surprise. I mean, there's this quote by Albert Einstein on the wall upstairs that says, surprise, I mean, Chris Walken and Albert Einstein say the same thing. Chris Walken says, if you can't surprise yourself, how do you expect to surprise anybody else? And I think he's right. On that note, why don't we just say...
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.